Alrighty, today I'm joined by somebody that I'm very grateful for. She's the host of the Smell Podcast, the podcast that interviews anybody with a smell or taste disorder ranging from anosmia, parosmia, phantosmia, hyposmia, to of course plain anosmia. She has built a community for people that would have otherwise been quite unlikely to find another human being going through anything remotely similar. So, Katie, thank you for joining me and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today. Yeah, my podcast covers all of the osmias, as Fifth Sense likes to call them.
Yeah. What do you think is the most common one? It's probably anosmia, right? Or do you think?
In the beginning, I think I focused a lot on people who have anosmia, but now with COVID-19 and all of that, I think that more common nowadays is actually parosmia. So people who are dealing with smell distortions.
Oh, distortions. Okay, so recently there's I don't know, there's an Instagram account called Folk Aromatherapy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing
Mhm.
that right, but they
Yeah,
put out. Oh, I guess you would know them, right?
that's Frau Kagalia. She's great.
Oh, okay, yeah, she put out a graphic that's very helpful. It basically shows, and I might put the graphic up on the screen. So anosmia is completely absent sense of smell. Hyposmia is a weak sense of smell. Phantosmia is wait. Oh, don't tell me.
Phantoms.
Yeah, phantom. But wait, that means that wait, they're
Yeah,
smelling something that's not there, right?
Yeah, so
Okay.
phantosmia is the one where you're smelling things that there's no like stimulus in the environment for.
So it's sort of yeah. So it's sort of oh, people sort of call it oh, it's like not schizophrenia, or isn't, no, it's like you're seeing something that's not there but you're smelling something that's not there, right? Sort of like
Yeah,
yeah,
it's like a phantom smell, so it doesn't really exist in the environment, but you are experiencing it, so it exists for you. But yeah, that one's pretty difficult because there's no perceivable trigger, or there's nothing in your area that might be causing that smell.
and I wonder, that's probably in the brain and not so much in the nose, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
Not a scientist, but
yeah.
that's what I think.
Okay, and then parosmia is distorted, so there's something in front of you but you're not smelling it the way it sort of should be, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they actually, apparently there's a word normosmia, which is just normal people, I guess. I don't know if they just came up with that recently because I hadn't heard of that one.
I think that one's been around for a while, but what's
Okay.
funny to me is that what's normal, right? It's very
Yeah.
subjective. So, I mean, maybe a better way would, instead of saying normal, would be like average, what most people
Right.
smell when
Right.
they smell something. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's normal osmia.
If you don't have any distortion, or you're just a regular person.
Yeah. So what they say for that one actually is people who have like me and you who have anosmia, we're anosmic. And
Right.
people who have a normal or functioning sense of smell with no issues, they're actually called
Oh
normosmics in
yeah, yeah,
science, which is interesting.
yeah. Okay. And then there's what I would love, wait, hold on, hyperosmia, right? Right,
Yep.
a heightened sense of smell, which I would love because I mean, for somebody that like has a totally absent, I would love to have that, right? But have you ever met anyone or interviewed somebody that has that?
I haven't actually had anyone on the podcast yet who has hyperosmia, but it's on my radar. I was actually just sent a really good interview from a colleague about a doctor in Australia who has hyperosmia. So I was looking for her on
Nice.
social media to see if she might be interested because I haven't had anyone with that. I think you know Dia Klein
Yeah.
or are aware of her. So she actually did like one of her funny YouTube videos with a gentleman who has hyperosmia.
Oh.
And it's really difficult for them because they can smell too much.
Oh.
Where like obviously you and I, we don't smell anything. People who have hyperosmia, it can be really overwhelming for them as well because
Hmm.
it's like too intense.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was sort of glorifying it a little bit, just being envious.
No, that's okay. I mean, I get it too. I'd love to be able to smell stuff again as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
that one can be really difficult for people too.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're gonna get into how, well, so for people that don't know, I was born and raised without a sense of smell. So we are called congenital anosmics, and you are acquired anosmic, meaning that
Mhm.
you had a sense of smell, but then it was sort of taken away from you. Why
Yep.
don't we go through that story? what were the moments leading up to? I mean, I read on your website that it was because of a post-viral infection.
Yeah, so I have been anosmic now, post-viral anosmic since about 2009. Late 2008, early 2009 is when I think I became anosmic. It might sound weird that I say when I think because most people like automatically know, but for me it was pretty gradual.
Mm-hmm.
I was really ill that winter. It was my first year of college, and I was living with five other girls in one apartment. It was a six-bedroom apartment, so it's definitely
Wow.
college
Experience.
housing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so one day in the morning, I was eating my cereal at the table, and my roommate sprayed like bleach cleaning spray, cleaning solution on the table, and was like wiping the table down, which to me, I was like, hey, like, don't do that while I'm eating here. I'm eating, you
Yeah.
know? But then I thought to myself, wait a second, I don't actually smell that. I was just like annoyed automatically because
Yeah.
she was cleaning somewhere close by to where I was eating. And then I was really worried. So I couldn't smell it. I couldn't perceive it at all. And then I started going around the kitchen trying to smell things and all of that. Went to my family doctor back in my hometown. It's about an hour and a half from where I went to college. And started there and tested me. I think he prescribed to me like some nasal steroids in case I had really bad allergies, like polyps, things that were blocking the molecules from even being able to get up into my nose to be perceived as smells. So we ruled that out. The nasal steroids didn't work,
Me
didn't
neither.
help me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then from there, I went to a specialist, so an ENT, ear, nose, and throat specialist, and they ruled out nasal polyps, anything else that might be obstructing it. And I think maybe they recommended the same like nasal steroids again, which didn't work. From there, I went on to see a neurologist to rule out any like brain related issues. So, wanting to make sure I didn't have any tumors that might be triggering anosmia, or anything else brain related. And somewhere in there throughout those different doctors, I also got like a CT scan, an MRI, all of those things. And the end result of my journey was basically, we're not quite sure why you have anosmia, but you can't smell, and good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be the standard response to anybody trying to get help if they have anosmia. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for somebody that used to be able to smell and lost it, like what were some of the things that you like maybe the top three things that you had to adjust to the most?
Top three things. I think it's just, um,
Because for me, I've always been this way, right? So,
yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if I have like three in particular, but I can think of right away, just
yeah.
like the impact on your mental health.
Yeah.
So when you go from having an ability, obviously when you can smell things, it helps with your flavor perception. So taste is defined as your ability to perceive like sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. So most people have taste, right? They have the five tastes. But the flavor, like the nuances of food, are provided by smell.
Do you think
And
it's
so
exclusively by smell, do you think? Like, or for the most
I
part?
don't know.
Yeah.
That's what like most of the literature says about, like in the world of science, that's what most of the literature says.
Yeah.
But then I meet people like you who have congenital anosmia, and people like Dia Klein who are very open in saying like, I can taste my food. I can taste the differences between like strawberries and mangoes and raspberries and things like that. But for me, having lost my sense of smell, it really did impact my eating. And so it also really impacted my mental health at the time. So like I told you a little bit about how I went to the doctor, and then when it was done, it was just sort of like, that's
Yeah.
it, like good luck.
Yeah.
So that was really scary, and there were no resources that I could find at the time. This was 2009, and there wasn't much. And I had never heard of anosmia. Like no one in my family knew about it. I had no knowledge of any of this whole world. I didn't even know you could lose your sense of smell. And so when that happened to me, it was really isolating. So I think that was a huge adjustment, was obviously dealing with the mental health aspect, because it's hard, it's scary, and it's isolating. And then I mentioned food. So food was definitely another adjustment, because I can remember in 2009, I actually think I gained a lot of weight because I couldn't perceive my flavor anymore. So I was just like eating things
Right.
to try to get back to what I was used to.
Yeah.
So definitely mental health and food. Those are top two. I don't know if I have another one, but if I think of it, I'll tell you.
Sure. No, well, when it comes to food, you mentioned how what were the things that people that when you taste it, you said it was sweet, salty, what were the other?
Sour.
Sour,
Yeah.
and
Bitter and umami.
what was that
Umami
last
is like,
one?
it's called umami. It's like the meaty taste of like ramen noodles, MSG.
Oh,
It's in like a
interesting.
lot of Chinese food.
Huh. Okay, yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna, I don't know. I wonder, because I don't know if I can like isolate that in my memory now. Because, well, I don't know. I mean, so sweet, sour, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and
And umami.
umami.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a meaty broth taste.
Okay.
Like I said, a lot of Chinese foods or like mushrooms, like cooked mushrooms, I think have that taste, things
Okay.
like that.
So, having been able to smell before and then eating, um, we talked about how like flavor is more associated with the smell. Have you noticed like how what is the difference between eating before and now for you?
For me, I think it's definitely a less like pleasurable experience. Like food is more perfunctory than it used to be. I think I've adjusted since I've been an anosmic for over a decade by now. I'm like used to my new normal, so I don't know if I even remember like what it was like beforehand.
Mm,
But sometimes if I really stop and pay attention, I'll realize like this food isn't very flavorful. Like it's
mm-hmm.
just you know what I mean? So there's definitely certain foods that I do not enjoy eating um, unless I oversalt them or over season them. So I have to be really careful with that, like in terms of diet and health.
Yeah.
Because I could eat what I want to eat and that would be great, but it would be not good for me in the long term. Like
Right.
I'm not super old, but I am in my 30s now. So just being aware that you can't like put a ton of sodium on all of your food. You can't put a ton of sugar into all of your food.
Mm-hmm.
You can, but it's going to have long-term health effects. So sometimes I'll eat stuff. And in particular, I think of like whitefish, like tilapia. Like I really like that. And it's really boring if you don't season it. You know, it's just like if you have a piece of white fish and it's not seasoned well or you don't like add lemon, it's not great.
Yeah.
I don't know if you feel the same, but it's not very flavorful. Whereas like salmon is like super fatty
Hmm.
and it tastes good because it has that like fattiness to it. Whereas tilapia is more like less fatty and it's kind of boring.
Hmm.
So I definitely, when I stop and am mindful of my food, there's things that I really enjoy eating and there's things that are not great, but I like force myself to eat them anyway because it's healthy.
Right. Okay. So you would say that compared to before, the flavor, a lot of the flavor is just sort of just
Gone.
gone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, for me.
Because when we tell people that, oh, we don't have a sense of smell, like people, one of the common things that people say is, oh, well, when you eat, it must be like when we're sick. Because when I'm sick,
Yeah.
I cannot, uh, taste. They say that they can't really taste when they're sick, but
I
I've
think what they mean is they can't flavor. It's not a
okay,
verb, but it should be.
right, okay.
The people who have a sense of smell when they are ill, I think that they're experiencing what it's like to have anosmia, where
Ah, okay, yeah,
they're not getting the flavor perception.
yeah.
But in common vocab, we say, I can't taste
Taste,
this.
yeah,
And technically, you can taste it
right,
probably, unless you really don't have a sense of taste, which is extremely rare.
yeah,
You're probably just not perceiving flavor. So
okay.
it's like a nuance, but there's a difference.
Yeah, I've
I mean,
always
I'm curious though. I know this is your podcast, but I'm
no.
so curious for you. Like, what do you think about being able to distinguish flavors?
Yeah, oh man, I have so many, a couple of things I could say about that, but yeah, whenever people said the whole like, oh, it must be when I'm sick, I've always wondered if it was exactly the same thing because when I was sick growing up, like I think it was pretty much the same, so I couldn't tell them that that was the right comparison. But
Hmm.
you're obviously you have been sick before when you could smell, so like you would have been
Yeah.
able to know if it was the same, right? So.
Hmm.
But for me, yeah, I mean, there's so many things that when you talked about when you were trying to eat more to be able to find that flavor back. Some people when they have anosmia, they either gain weight or lose weight, right? And for
Hmm.
me, I feel like maybe part of the reason why I've always generally been slightly underweight is because I have sort of a less of a attraction to food, I think.
Right.
And I think I told you like the most important stories of my anosmia experience on your the episode that we did on your podcast. I smelled for
Hmm.
the first time when I was 15,
Right.
right? And I'll never forget that. It was yeah, like smell for the first time when I was 15, and that's like not a really common thing to say for anyone, right? Like
And you haven't really smelled again since then, is that right?
I've smelled a couple, so I think I've smelled a couple times. Once for sure, I think I'm pretty sure that I was smelling. Like that's the other thing. Like you don't know if it's like you're actually smelling or if you're like for somebody that grew up with anosmia, you're not sure if what you're experiencing at the moment is smell or if it's something else. But I'm pretty sure there were a couple times when I was smelling.
Hmm.
So the first time, yeah, the first time I was eating, it was after school. My uncle had a restaurant across the street. I was hungry. I ordered Taiwanese chicken nuggets, which I think that they season it really really well. I always liked it growing up, even not being able to smell because it there is a saltiness to it,
Hmm.
and I think for people that with anosmia that we particularly we could sense salty right with our taste buds. So I like
Right.
that anyway. But out of nowhere, I just ate it, and I always like describe it like this, where it's like there's this whole thing going on like in front of my face, like right in front of it's like right here, and then
Hmm.
it's almost like I had nerves that were extending to the space to the air in front of me that I could sense. It was almost like
Right.
I had hands, but it's like my nerves that are sensing the air in front of me, and also like
Hmm.
sort of in the mouth and up the nose sort of thing. Yeah, it was. I'll never forget it. It was like I saw black and white all my life, and then like seeing color for the first time.
Right.
And
I
yeah,
wonder, ha- I don't remember from our conversation before, but have you been to check if you have like polyps or anything?
I don't know what that is. Polyps? I'm gonna
Yeah,
Google
like
that.
polyps in your nose. Have you ever been to the doctor for your anosmia?
Yeah, yeah. How do you spell
Okay. And so they
polyps? I'm just gonna quickly
Polyps, I think.
PS.
You're gonna put me on the spot, make me spell stuff.
Polyps are tissue growths. That
They like block the nasal passages sometimes. But you've been
um
to the doctor when
I
you were little,
have.
and they okay, so they probably ruled that out then.
Yeah, they stuck a camera up my nose,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I don't think that's what that was. But yeah, I mean, that was yeah, it was quite insane. But the another thing about like food, so I always thought that for me or people with congenital or just anosmia, it's when we're eating all the flavors that a regular person would perceive. For us, it's sort of just proportionately reduced. So like if there
Mm.
if somebody with normosmia or a regular person could taste and sense the flavor, like say like they get like 100 for an anosmic, I think that it might be like 20% of that. But I
Mm.
always thought that it was proportionately just decreased. But then I was at a Middle Eastern restaurant, and there was different flavors of hummus on the table, and we talked about how I couldn't smell, and so they just pointed to one of the hummus flavors, and told me to try it and tell them what it sort of tasted like.
Hmm.
And yeah, I put it in my mouth and I thought about it, and I was completely honest. It was like I said, this is probably the least flavorful thing I've ever put in my mouth. It was almost just
Right.
like a flavorless paste that I was just putting in my mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and but I could taste some of the other hummuses, right? But then what they told me was the one that I just put in my mouth was the most flavorful hummus on the table.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
so that's sort of like I thought that I already knew what my condition was, but when they told me
Hmm.
that, I just learned that okay, so it's not equally proportionally just reduced. It's there are some foods where if you can't smell, you just don't get the flavor, Whereas other foods, it might be just like, oh, you don't need to rely on your sense of smell as much. Your taste will be sort of adequate. So,
Right.
yeah.
It's wild. There's a lot that's unknown about having anosmia and how it impacts the food that we eat and our food perception. One of my goals in life is that so I'm part of STANA, or the Smell and Taste Association of North America. And so that is a newly formed patient advocacy organization for people like us who have smell and taste disorders. So obviously with COVID, it's very timely, but this has been in the works for a while, like even before COVID. But one of my goals as an organization and personal goals eventually is to do more research on taste perception for people who have different kinds of anosmia. So, in particular, I'm fascinated by people like you who have congenital, and I'd like to know, what is your flavor perception? And I don't think there's any studies like that. So if anyone's interested, if anyone's watching and is interested, you can get in touch with me through the STANA website. It's just thestana.org. If you're interested. And I don't have anyone to do the study yet, but I would love to do it in the future, where we can actually somehow test people who have congenital, maybe test people who have acquired, and then compare and contrast, because there are those who have congenital anosmia who swear that they can taste, they can perceive flavors just as well as people who have a sense of smell. And I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
obviously they think it's true, and I believe whoever their own experience, because
Yeah.
it's their own lived experience. But like scientifically speaking,
Yeah.
it would be really cool to have a study to show, like, yeah, people who have congenital anosmia can perceive flavors just as well as those who don't, or people who have congenital anosmia cannot perceive flavors like those who have a sense of smell. So scientifically, I am fascinated by that.
Would you, oh, I guess you have to be there in person to do that study, right? I can't just tell you.
Probably.
Yeah. Because
Yeah,
I'd
I think,
volunteer.
I don't know. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. I don't know exactly how it would work.
Yeah.
I'll have to find some really cool, smart scientists to partner with.
Yeah. Let me know
But I
if
think,
you, yeah, figure it out.
yeah, maybe food kits or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be really interesting to know that.
Yeah. Well, they may feel like they taste everything, but like, and these are people who are congenital anosmics who definitely can't smell that are saying this.
That's what I would like to know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that I've heard from some who think that they can perceive flavors. Their food experience is just the same, which is great.
Yeah.
But like scientifically, I'd love to know if that's accurate.
Yeah, maybe they don't know what they're missing. Like I didn't know why,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, tell me what your well, I don't know. Well, yeah, what were your experience with alcohol is like before when you could smell and after, like what's the difference there? Like, do you
Yeah,
remember?
so I don't know. I know now sometimes if I drink alcohol, like the next day, you can still like sense it sort of.
In your mouth,
Like
maybe?
no, I don't know. Like I can sort of sense like sort of smell, but it's not really a smell. It's like
Hmm.
residual.
Okay.
I don't have any idea what that's about, but I've seen on some of the Facebook groups online that people have a similar experience. So that's another thing that is really interesting, is like what's going on there.
Hmm.
So like if someone who has anosmia drinks alcohol, why would they then get like the sense of a smell in their nose?
Oh,
Like is what's going on there? So I don't know. Yeah, alcohol is not very enjoyable to me because it doesn't I don't
just in general.
the nuance of it, like
Yeah.
my favorite is when people try to give you like fancy wines or things like that, and they're like, "Oh, this wine tastes so good, and the notes of roses and apples or whatever," and you're just like, "Mm-hmm, great."
Yeah.
It all tastes exactly the same to me. It's like bitter or it's sweet, or you know what I mean? So for me, if I do drink any kind of alcohol, I typically gravitate towards things that have bubbles in them, like spumante or lambrusco.
I have
Those are
no
my
idea
favorite.
what those are.
Those are my favorite kinds of wines, but like
Okay.
just regular plain wine to me is not that good.
Okay. I mean, what about before? I mean, I know that you started to lose your sense of smell when you were in college, right? So maybe you
Yeah.
didn't have that much experience with alcohol when
Not a
you,
ton of
yeah.
experience at the time, but I don't really recall having like the stink of maybe a smell in your nose after having alcohol. Yeah, I don't remember that, but now sometimes I do get that if I have some. So I don't know what that's about.
But what about the moment while you're drinking alcohol? Like when you could smell versus after you acquired anosmia?
I mean, I don't enjoy it now. If
Okay.
that's kind of the question, like it doesn't, the taste of it is kind of not great.
Yeah.
So a lot of wine, a lot of people in the wine industry are really highly trained smellers.
Mm,
So that's what it's about. Like a lot of wine is about smell,
right.
and wine appreciation. They're called noses in the industry.
Oh,
Like that's their job title is
yeah.
a professional nose. If you look it up, typically they're talking about either one, the wine industry, or two, the perfume industry, um, because they can detect like the nuances of things. So yeah, for me, like alcohol's not that enjoyable because I don't really perceive the flavor.
Hmm.
So it's just kind of the base taste and it's not that good. Like it's just kind of bitter, especially if it's beer. Like beer is just really bitter to me.
Hmm.
How about for you? Like, can you differentiate?
Um, yeah, I mean, so the reason why I asked about alcohol was I'm pretty sure that was the second thing that I had ever smelled after the first time when I was 15.
Oh,
Yeah, so that's why
okay.
like those two things will always be stuck in my memory. And I was on family vacation, and my dad's side of the family drinks quite a bit, and so like even when we were younger, we got all the cousins to like partake, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so before, um, I mean, it wasn't obviously, well, for one, before I couldn't really tell the difference between like whiskey and vodka because, they're both liquors. They're both like roughly the same percentage of alcohol, like 40%, right? Whiskey versus alcohol versus vodka. But they were just like when I took the shot, it was pretty, I couldn't really tell the difference. And I don't think I'm not, I feel like as I got older, I might be slightly be able to tell like a smidge of difference. But when
Hmm.
that one time that I smelled, the second time that I ever smelled, so I might or might not have been able to even like sense it before I drank it, like just having it in front of me. Now, obviously, I can't. Nothing. Nothing. I can't smell anything when I put anything here.
Right.
But when I took the shot, it was also like this whole like I'm doing the same hand motions where it's like
Yeah,
this
I get it.
whole thing, right? And then like it's like just it's not just in front of you, but it's also like in your mouth and up the nose sort of thing. It's like over here. It's sort of like this
Yeah.
circle thing, like over here. Yeah, and it was just so much more than usual because before, if I just took the shot, it would just be like not pleasant in the mouth. But you drink it and it's sort of over, right? But
Right.
with when what I'm pretty sure I was doing was smelling it. It was just so much more involved, right? And
Right.
yeah, that's why I asked about
That's
alcohol.
what I mean, that's what flavor perception is.
Okay.
So it's hard probably for you since you've grown up being most likely congenital, but I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that you've had moments of being able to perceive these flavors because maybe you're not fully anosmic, maybe you're just like extremely hyposmic, very, very, very reduced sense of smell. I don't know. But that's really what flavor is. And it's
Okay.
awesome.
That
So like
yeah.
that's where if you have like a really great meal, and you're experiencing all these flavors of the food, that's kind of what it is. Whereas I
Yeah.
think you and I live in this existence of not having that pop of flavor
Yeah.
most of the time.
So when I was doing this whole thing, you could understand what I was
Yeah,
expressing.
I know what you mean.
Because
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not like when I do this, like I'm not. I don't really have any reference of like, oh, people will understand this. Like I'm really just trying to like
I
relive
get
what I
it.
was. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I understand. There's
Yeah.
like a huge difference between like thinking back like a meal where you can like smell the fat of the food or like the oil that it's cooking in and like the spices and the herbs and all of that stuff. Like that is different
Hmm.
than my current experience. My current lived experience is just basic tastes. So it's sweet, it's salty, it's bitter, it's sour. It might have like that meaty-ish taste to it, but the flavor perception's not there. And I'm used to it now, but it is depressing. Like that, if you just, that fact is depressing
Yeah.
if you think about it.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, I don't know if you remember my personal theory on like the link between anosmia and depression. I don't know if you remember me
Mhm.
talking about that before.
Yeah, you did. And talk about it. You want to tell everyone a little more about it?
Yeah, I mean, sure. So as we were describing, like I think that out of all your senses, and I when I was reading your article, your blog post, there was a couple of other articles written by other people with anosmia, and one of them was this mother or mother to be that was also anosmic, and she was sort of expressing her frustration with people who, when you tell them, "Oh, I have anosmia," the other common thing people say is, "Oh, well, if you could choose one of your senses to lose, you'd probably lose that one, so it's not that bad." You know, and they'd probably say like, "Oh, well, at least you can still see. At least you didn't lose your sense of sight or hearing, right?" And she was sort of
Mhm.
expressing how like, "Oh, it's just so it's easy for people to just like say that off the cuff," but um, yeah. So like, in my opinion, so out of the five senses, smell is probably one of the most, if not the most, intimate because it's linked with your, you know, that thing that we have to do to live, which is breathe, right? So the way I describe it is it's just more pleasurable for people that can smell to breathe, you know. And so what I mean, I guess I couldn't really do this when I was on your podcast because it's just audio. But if you imagine a graph, right, and the y-axis is like, say up here is something that smells really really good, and down here is something that smells really really bad, and then the x-axis is time moving forward. So I guess you could do this. So this could be, you know, 24 hours in a day or throughout your week or throughout your month, whatever it is. Let's say within a day, right? When you go to work, maybe if you walk to work, there's a bakery on the way and you smell something nice, and then you go to the subway in New York and it smells really really crappy, right? But then
Mhm.
you have this line where it's fluctuating, it's going up and down. You smell something good, oh, it's pleasant. You smell something bad, it's not pleasant. But that sort of impacts and stimulates your brain, and sort of it pulls your mood up and down in a way, I think, right? When you're smelling something nice versus when you smell something bad. But at the very least, you have this sort of activity that's fluctuating up and down throughout your day. um, but for people who can't smell, it's sort of like just this stagnant line, right?
Right.
Because we're not getting that stimulation, and it's sort of like if you imagine a heart monitor, it's just like beep, beep,
Mhm. Yeah.
as opposed to a healthy like up and down, right?
It's a good point. It's a good analogy.
Yeah, that's what. And the other analogy, of course, is you know, if you could only see shades of black and white, and then out of nowhere you just see, you know, color. For them, that's the way I experienced my first time being able to smell. But then for me, it was sort of taken away from me again. So I'm not a religious person, but I was joking with my friends that it was just almost like God just being like, yeah, here, I'm teasing you with it, and I'm just taking away from you, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, those are good analogies of like the heart rate graph, and then obviously, I always think the one about color is a really good one because
yeah,
it is like your existence is muted
yeah,
from what other people experience. It's like if you are, um, yeah, it's like if you're blind and you can't see anything at all. Obviously, that's the you can't appreciate certain things in life, and that's just how it is. You know,
yeah,
like you don't know what purple means,
yeah,
you don't know what green means. Like people can try and explain to you, like, oh, it smells like this or it smells like that, but if we take it over to the vision analogy, like how do you describe purple?
yeah. I
It's
don't.
really hard.
Yeah,
So, and with especially with smells, I think our vocabulary for smell is really poor. We usually describe the way that things smell in terms of other smells.
yeah,
So, like, what does citrus smell like? Oh, it smells like an orange.
yeah,
Okay, well, what does an orange smell like? Oh, it's like citrusy.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It doesn't do it for me. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like it's really hard to describe smells. It's hard to describe colors. It's difficult to describe things that people haven't experienced before. And to your point with like the black and white TV, um, vision wise, for me now, that's how it is for like food. Like food is in black and white TV,
Yeah.
whereas beforehand it was like color TV.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
So describing have your favorite foods changed from before you could smell versus now? Because maybe like what was your favorite food before you had to be able to smell it to really enjoy it versus now maybe there might be some other foods where it's not dependent on your smells as much, so you could that your favorite sort of changed.
I don't know. So I am from Idaho originally, and I am a typical or stereotypical Idahoan that I love all things potatoes.
Oh,
So like mashed, fried, baked, everything potato wise, I'll eat it. It's my favorite. So I have always been that way where I really like those home cooked style meals, like a meat and a vegetable and a potato. You know what I mean? Like those
okay.
kinds of things. Like my family and friends make fun of me because my favorite place to go and eat is Cracker Barrel, like that kind of food.
I don't think we have that.
Okay, it's just like country style, home style food,
Oh,
like
okay.
meatloaf and
Oh,
turkey
okay.
and things like that.
Sounds good to me.
Steak. I know, yeah, it's delicious. It's my favorite kind of food. So I still like will gravitate towards those types of foods, and I think it's just because I'm used to them from before and I really enjoy them. But for sure, I will eat things in excess now. Like I'll eat them more often, I guess, than I would have before, like crackers, chips, things like that. Like I would eat them all day. I would just eat chips or crackers because it's like crunchy. So like that's one thing in particular that I have to just be careful about.
Hmm.
Um, is like, are you bored or are you hungry or are you just eating chips because it's crunchy? You know what I mean? So whereas I really enjoy chips, like I can sort of get the same thing from carrots because they're crunchy. So like baby
Oh,
carrots
okay.
are like a fun thing for me. But some some fruits like banana, ugh, cannot.
Oh,
Like eating a plain banana, if it's like smushy at all, is
yeah.
horrific to me. Like the texture of it is awful. So I typically avoid bananas unless they're very ripe, or I'll put them in a smoothie.
Right. Was that
But I cannot just eat a plain banana.
was that the same way before, or was that after?
That's been since I've been an anosmic. I think
Okay.
beforehand, the texture of bananas didn't bother me as much because, again, you can get that flavor perception of like the pop of the banana.
Now I'm
Um,
wondering what that feels like, because you don't a lot of times like in
yeah,
Nosmix you don't imagine certain foods have like that extra flavor. You just think, oh, banana
yeah,
is just a banana, but now I'm curious what a banana truly tastes like.
it's good. Like, yeah, it's definitely,
Better?
yeah. I don't know. Again, I have a bad vocabulary to
Yeah.
describe, but with smell, banana is much better.
Wow.
So yeah, I put it into like a smoothie. Um, but yeah, I don't know. So I think my go-to foods have remained the same just because they're like comfort items at this point.
Okay.
But I do gravitate towards more texture-based foods like crunchy since I've
Yeah.
been an anosmic than I did before.
Yeah. So texture is another thing because my favorite foods, ironically, well, not ironically, coincidentally, they're all foods that are easy to just sort of put in your mouth and eat. So steak, Taiwanese chicken nuggets, and sashimi, right? So that none of those have bones. It's just like meat that you can just put in your mouth and eat, chew and eat, right? It's really and there's a sort of a chewiness to it, and then I don't
Mhm.
know. So I think for people who can't smell, I think texture also plays into like you described a lot into it. But also with artificial flavors, like what they put in chips. When I was talking to those people that I was at the Middle Eastern restaurant with, yeah, as I was learning that my perception of taste and smell it wasn't just the proportional decrease in being able to sense the flavor. We're talking about how that's probably the reason why I also really liked potato chips growing up because they purposely inject a lot of artificial flavors into it, which is why
Make it better, yeah.
yeah. And the other thing when I was at one of the ENTs, one of the things that they do is they always make you question: Are you sure you can't, or are you sure you can't taste? Because they'll say they'll think that maybe you can't, or yeah, she was really making me question like what I understood as my own experience. So she would say, if you try two different flavors of the same food that has the same texture, so like two flavors of ice cream. And if you blindfolded yourself, would you really be able to tell the difference? Because at first I would say, oh yeah, I mean I could taste the same, or I could differentiate between an apple and an orange, and then she would say, oh well, you could
The texture
tell
is
the texture
different.
is
Yeah.
different. Yeah, so like if I put two things in your mouth where the texture is the same but the flavor is different, would
Like
you be able to
yogurt
tell?
or ice cream.
Yeah, and you know what? And I never really truly did a formal test, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, like we have barbecue chips in Canada, and then we also have ketchup chips, and I'm pretty sure I could taste the difference. So
I feel like you just came up with your next YouTube video.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I
Someone,
think yeah,
you're gonna have to blindfold yourself and have someone give you tomato versus barbecue chips,
yeah,
raspberry versus strawberry yogurt.
yeah, yeah,
We're
yeah.
gonna have to see this.
Oh, yeah, maybe I'll do that.
You have congenital, so you're the perfect test subject. So if you blindfold yourself and they give it to you, can you
Yeah,
tell?
maybe I'll do that one day.
I'd watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so you wrote an article about smell training,
Hmm.
right? And so that's a huge sort of topic. And I read somebody left a comment on your article. I'm just gonna read it because I feel the same way. Tanya, I believe, Tanya with a J, so it might be Tanja. No, I'm pretty sure it's Tanya. She said, "Thank you for this. Olfaction is such an underrated sense. To me, it feels like I am always looking at a colorless sunset, to quote another anosmic person. I think I'd get more depressed than I am if I tried to persevere with smell training. It's on the list of future activities because it has been 6 years since I lost my sense of smell, so I'm not in any hurry." But yeah, like I sort of feel the same way. Because initially when I first heard about smell training, I sort of read a couple things about people doing it, and the conclusion was that they never got their sense of smell back, so it was sort of discouraging for me. And
Yeah.
yeah, I sort of felt the same way. Like if I sort of tried, I'm sort of like getting my hopes up, and if it doesn't work,
Mhm.
I'm sort of let down, so I'm sort of afraid to give it a go in the first place. But you still been going with that, or
Um, yeah, so here and there, intermittently throughout the years, definitely have attempted to do smell training. Um, I think it's important to distinguish that it's probably not going to work for everyone.
yeah,
And I know that that's not the best news,
yeah,
but if we think about this like analogy wise, again, in terms of other things, it may not work for people who have congenital anosmia because in order to perceive the smells, you have to have something in your brain that can perceive the smells.
mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
depending on
you're not,
why and how you're anosmic, if you were born without those nerves or if you were born without those genetics in your brain to allow you to perceive smells, unfortunately, now with the way that technology is, I don't think there's anything that's going to let you have that ability to perceive smells.
mm-hmm.
So, smell training for some may just not work,
Yeah,
which is maybe an unpopular opinion, but I do think it's important to be honest
yeah,
about that because to your point, like, are you going to dedicate a bunch of time and effort to doing something if there's no way you can benefit from it? I don't know. And
yeah,
so and I don't ever want to tell someone don't do this thing because that's not what I'm about. I think that if it could be helpful for you, then absolutely try it, but also be realistic about your own situation.
right,
So scientifically, in my own situation, because I have had complete anosmia for over a decade, I've spoken with a few different scientists who have told me that at this point it's highly unlikely that I'm going to regain my sense of smell.
hmm.
Is there always a chance that I can? Absolutely. But I don't like focus on that anymore.
Yeah,
I've come to terms with the fact that I'm probably not going to be able to smell again.
yeah,
And I don't know if you want to call me negative for that or
no,
if I'm just realistic. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, I do try it every once in a while, focusing on it because there's always the chance that you can.
yeah,
But then at what point is that bad for your mental health, too?
mm-hmm. Yeah,
To
sort of,
be like falsely trying to do something.
yeah, getting your hopes up, right, and just sort of yeah, like that's yeah. I mean,
Yeah, and I always want to be like, "Rah, rah, yay, it's gonna work for you," but, like, it may not, and
yeah,
so, yeah, uh, what people know right now, what science knows right now, is that olfactory training is not harmful out of all of the things that could potentially help you, as long as you're not smelling like solvents or cleaners or like really strong chemicals. If you're doing it the way that Dr. Thomas Hummel created it with the 4 different scents, rose, lemon, eucalyptus, and clove, and you're doing it twice a day, 30 seconds each time that you're smelling them, you're really focusing and being mindful about it, that could help you, and it's probably not going to harm you. It's most effective for those who have recently lost their sense of smell. So within about 6 months or so.
Oh, okay.
In my case, it's probably not going to help me overall. I will always like try it and I'll be mindful and positive too, but I also try to balance that with being realistic, like I said. So, yeah, I think that it's important to be aware that it might help, but also back to analogies like if your nerves are damaged to the extent that they're not going to recover, we wouldn't say to someone who lost their leg, like, work out your leg a little harder.
Yeah, because it's not there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just balance the having hope. It's something that can help some people, but also being realistic, depending on the type of anosmia that you have, that it may not work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, saying to somebody that lost their leg, oh, if you go to the gym, maybe yeah, it doesn't really make sense because you don't have that limb to work out, right? So yeah, I remember the ENT told me, I can only go off by memory, but I think she said something about the olfactory bulb. I think that's the word that she used. And there's sort of, I think it's sort of like, maybe it's like if it's over here or something, can't remember, but it's sort of like this concave thing where I don't know, I think it's like, I think she said that I'm not sure if it's bones or tendons or whatever, but it might be, she said that mine was slightly smaller than the average, and that might have, yeah, maybe, I don't know if it's like not giving the nerves enough room or if it's like constricting anything, or yeah, what that
Right.
is, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I mentioned before that my sister also was born and raised without a sense of smell, and um, yeah, weirdly enough, around the time when I smelled the first time when I was 15, she was 16. She's a year and a half older than I am. That was the same age that she said she started to be able to smell, and now she's pretty much like everybody else. So like
That's
I've always
fascinating.
yeah, I've always been like super envious of her on that. Um yeah, so like I wonder when you were talking about how like if some people, like if you're congenital, maybe you just don't have that nerve, or maybe that nerve is just like very much like shrunken or something, like,
Mm-hmm.
and this is me being unusually optimistic because I'm not usually optimistic, but maybe if you like work out that nerve, maybe you're stimulating it, maybe I don't know, there might be hope there where you're exercising it, maybe if it's not that you completely lack the nerve, maybe it's like just
Mm-hmm.
shrunken or something, and maybe if you keep like
Yeah,
like poking at it or stimulating it, maybe
exactly.
yeah, so
That's why I want to make sure that like the vibe, the message that I'm putting out there
yeah,
is that I think smell training is awesome. I think that it can be really effective for some people,
yeah,
and it depends on how and why you lost your sense of smell.
yeah,
So it doesn't hurt to try it,
yeah,
and absolutely do so. But then if you have like a definitive answer that this thing isn't working because of like permanent damage or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Just
yeah,
balance the hope with the realism
yeah,
is what I'm saying, because I don't want people to get frustrated. And it can be really frustrating. Like trying to do smell training can be extremely frustrating
yeah,
if it's not working, and it takes a lot of dedication
yeah,
and resilience. Some
yeah,
people who have just lost their sense of smell, they might not have like the mental capacity or the emotional capacity to sit there and smell stuff. And it seems like, oh, just sit there and smell stuff. That's so easy. It's
yeah.
not. Smell training can be really difficult.
And the way I would describe it to people listening, which most people listening is probably going to be people that can smell, because that's just the population of Earth, right? But it's sort of like standing on the edge of a cliff and saying like, hey, if you jump hard enough, you might be able to fly. Telling somebody like, hey, just keep jumping, keep jumping. But when in fact that the likelihood of you being able to fly is not, because we're human, that's sort of just like the fact of the matter, like but yeah, for people to just keep telling you like, hey, just keep jumping, jump harder, and then you might be able to fly. It's sort of that like, or like keep walking against that wall, maybe you might be able to like walk through it one day. I don't know. Like
Mhm.
it's
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
so I guess, yeah, like you are probably somebody who has spoken to the highest amount of people who with smell disorder, like even including ENTs, just by
I
just
don't
by
know. Maybe.
well, certainly like one, yeah, you're up there for sure, right? Like having spoken, I think you recently just reached 100 episodes, right, on your
Yeah,
podcast.
I
Yeah.
did. Yeah.
So yeah, like I have to imagine like a lot of ENTs, they probably their patients, like anosmia might be a part of it, but it's probably more their ear and throat that they're looking at most of the time. I'm just guessing. Maybe there might be some other issues with nose that doesn't have to do with smell, but like I have to guess that you're probably definitely somebody that has spoken to the most, or one of the most highest number of people with smell disorder. So just curious, generally, like after having spoken to so many people with smell disorder, what do you think you've learned after all talking to all these people? Whether it's just on the topic of anosmia or just in general.
That's a really good question. I think overall, what it has taught me. So I've been doing the podcast since August of 2018. So this year, August, it will be 4 years, which is amazing. And there are so many more people to speak to.
Yeah.
So
My
I've
sister
gotten,
is one.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's on my list. Yeah, I have lots of people on the list to
Yeah.
reach out to. So there's so many different people who have a smell disorder. And then I've also tried to start becoming more inclusive of, obviously, if they have like a taste disorder, they kind of go hand in hand, but some people only have taste disorders. But I think that overall, what I've learned is that we're a very ignored population. And a lot of the times, it's because people don't speak about it in general.
Hmm.
So a lot of people who have like visual disabilities, it's visual. You can see it
Yeah.
and it's a clue.
Yeah.
You and I have an invisible problem.
Yeah.
You can't tell by looking at either one of us that we cannot smell.
Yeah.
And so, unless you or I just choose to disclose to that person that I can't smell and this is how it impacts my life, a lot of people don't know about it. And so, one thing with COVID in particular that has been helpful, COVID is awful, but one thing that has been helpful out of it is the fact that smell and taste disorders can be a thing.
Yeah.
And I would never wish anyone to experience a smell or taste disorder, but that is one positive thing out of this pandemic,
Yeah.
is that now the word anosmia and parosmia, those words are on people's radars.
Yeah.
Well, I think the number one thing that I've learned, honestly, is that we just need to talk about it more, and that we don't speak about it enough. And I think that's why I'm always excited to meet with people and talk to them about smell. Um, I just had a situation where there was like a work party, and one of my coworkers, we did like white elephant gift exchange. And one of my coworkers, I ended up getting a gift that was a candle.
Oh.
And so for me, who I am, it's not the appropriate moment to educate everyone in the room about smell disorders because
Yeah.
it's a holiday party,
Yeah.
but I no longer pretend.
Yeah.
So I didn't open it and smell it and say like, "Oh, this is so great." I was just
No.
like, "Oh, thank you so much for the
Yeah.
gift."
Yeah.
And it was a little awkward because someone else also got a candle and they opened it and smelled it and did the thing
Oh.
because they can.
Yeah.
I cannot. So I just like made a point of not pretending.
Yeah.
So I try to like make a point of not pretending that I can smell stuff when I cannot. And if it's appropriate, to explain that I don't have a sense of smell. Um, so I think that more people need to start talking about it, and they need to say like it's a problem. If it is, it might not be a problem for some,
Yeah.
but it impacts my life in X, Y, and Z ways. And I think as more people because of COVID, unfortunately, are dealing with this, the importance of how it impacts us on a day-to-day basis is starting to be realized. So I just think that's the coolest thing that I've learned, is that it's important to speak about it. We don't talk about it enough. And over all of the people that I've spoken to, I think that's the overall theme, is that a lot of people don't take them very seriously.
Hmm. Yeah, and yeah, it you could tell like when you know the people who with anosmia, you sort of expect like, oh, when it comes up, because we don't always bring it up, right? Unless, yeah, like, unless something happens, you even sometimes, anosmic people might just like not say anything, just to like avoid controversy, right? But even when
Mhm.
you say something, there's just like there's the top three things that we already know people are gonna say. They're gonna say, "Oh, so you can't smell this, that, or the other," or "Oh, well,
Mhm.
at least you don't have to smell this, that, or the other," or "Oh, well, at least, at least you didn't lose your sense of sight, hearing, or stuff like that." So like, yeah, like it's yeah, it's very common for people to just sort of like downplay it.
Mhm.
So when I went to my ENT, or I mean, this was before the pandemic, but it was also like sort of right before the pandemic, so that it sort of like slowed down the medical. She wanted me to see a geneticist to see if I might have Kalman syndrome, and I
Mhm.
think I've heard on your podcast that been
Yeah.
mentioned a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of COVID, my appointment got like delayed like by a year, right? But I
Right.
eventually did, like a couple months ago. I did like a questionnaire, but in order to get my genes sort of tested, it costs money. And they didn't tell me how much it cost, but they wanted to see if they could get it sort of subsidized. But it didn't go through because it wasn't considered like a medical emergency.
Mm.
The geneticist tried to phrase it as, oh, well, I can't exactly remember how she tried to frame it for them, but she did mention that if I was expecting a child, if I was a woman and I was pregnant, or if I was a man expecting a child, that might have actually pushed that forward, because you might be curious about whether or not your child might get it.
Right. The genetics. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think I do, because I think Kalman syndrome, like one of the main symptoms is having a delayed puberty. Yeah,
Yeah.
having
On
delayed puberty. What do you what do you know about Kalman syndrome? I think you've spoken to a couple people that mentioned it.
Yeah. Well, anosmia is a typical for people who have Kalman syndrome. They also actually typically have anosmia. I've actually spoken to a few people, like you said, who have Kalman's, and then I actually spoke with a woman who has Kalman's, which is Kalman's itself is extremely rare, but it
Mm,
impacts more males than females, and so Kalman syndrome in females is like the rare of the rare.
mm,
So it was really interesting to speak to her. So if anyone's interested in checking out her episode, her name is Josie Ratton. I don't know what episode number it was, but her and I spoke about that. And she explained really well, I think, um, that it's like a delayed onset of puberty. Most of them have anosmia as a byproduct because of the genetics of the disease, or I don't know if it's considered a disease, but the genetics of the issue. Um, and it's just fascinating to me that there's this whole subset of the population who has this one thing that's also causing anosmia. There's so many different like causations of it.
yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty interesting that they wanted you to get tested for that. Hopefully, eventually you'll be able to rule that out for sure, but it sounds like it's not a thing for you.
Yeah, I don't think it is, and I think even if we got to be able to test it, yeah, they said that it wouldn't necessarily help me, but I think it might have contributed to the data that they have on the issue, to the research maybe, but that didn't go through. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, one of the questions that you ask your guests is whether or not you consider it to be a disability, and we sort of already talked about it, how it's not sort
Mhm.
of like an immediate thing, like being blind or deaf, like it's sort of, yeah, more of an immediate issue. So I guess, yeah, you sort of have the same answer, right? It technically is, or could be classified as a, or is for some people. Um, yeah, but it's not sort of as immediate.
I think my answer to this question is that I think it is. So I'm even going to type in right here. Let's see, definition of disability.
Oh
So
yeah.
The definition of a disability is a physical or mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. Right?
Yeah.
So,
Senses and activities right there. So,
yeah, exactly. So to me, on just the bare face of it, it's absolutely a disability to not have a sense of smell.
yeah.
Um, because it's impacting your ability to sense your world.
Yeah.
There's things that are major concerns for us that aren't for other people.
Yeah.
Safety and fire,
Yeah.
obviously, fire safety is a big one.
Yeah.
Smoke, sensing those types of things, we wouldn't know that. That's a problem. So you have to make sure you have really good working smoke detectors.
Gas leak too.
The gas leaks. So in the gas, they put in a certain chemical to make it so that people can smell when the gas is leaking, and we wouldn't be able to know that. So that's something that's a big concern as well.
Yeah.
I think in terms of like personal safety, if you're out and about, like at a club or at a restaurant drinking in an area where there's alcohol, one of the things that you can usually use to tell if someone else is inebriated around you, besides how they're acting, is if they smell like alcohol. So, like, maybe for me as a woman, I think about that more often. Like, I can't, is your behavior weird because, like, are you drunk?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. It's because I can't smell if you're drunk or not. Or if someone's been smoking marijuana. You won't know those things if you have anosmia. You won't be able to tell. Maybe you can tell by their behavior, but another huge clue is the scent.
Right.
So I've been out like side in areas before, like out on walks and stuff in like public places. There used to be this like walking path where we used to live, and I was with a friend, and she's like, "Do you smell that? Someone's smoking." And I was like, "Oh, like cigarettes?" They're like, "No, they're smoking weed." And I was like, "Nope, can't tell." But you know what I mean? Like just things like that. So you have like these environmental triggers that are missing. So I personally absolutely think it is a disability.
Yeah.
That word in particular is really triggering for some people. They don't like that. To me, it doesn't bother me. The fact that it's just a fact about me that I have a disability. And it doesn't mean that I need anything. Like, I'm not asking for anything in particular. But there's a lot of people who get very upset by the idea that you consider anosmia a disability.
Really? I didn't realize that. Wait, who are these people? I've never seen that before.
Oh yeah, you should. Yeah, you should go check out. So Dia, again, I shout out to Dia Klein if you're watching eventually. She did a really great video. She does speeches and things where she talked about how anosmia is a disability for her. And you can read through some of the comments of people who are like, "This is ridiculous. It's not a disability. Like, why are you asking for stuff and stuff?" And it's just wild to me.
Is this on one of her YouTube videos?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah, that people are so offended because they're like, well, you have all of your limbs,
Oh, come
or
on.
you don't need a special anything. And it's like, that's the point. We need to reclaim this word. Just because I say that I have a disability, that I don't have a sense of smell, I'm not asking you for anything special. That's not what it means.
No.
So yeah, you should definitely check out her video. I don't know what it's called.
I'll look it up. Yeah.
She did a video on it has like a picture of her holding a parking pass, and I think that's what made a lot of people angry. But the whole point when she's doing her video is that her disability doesn't require a parking pass, but it's just as legitimate.
Right. Oh my God. I didn't realize that people would. I mean, so this might be an important example. I almost burned down my house because I couldn't be able to smell. My dad wanted me. He was cooking some Chinese herbs, and he needed to leave the house for to do a couple errands, and he told me to watch it, and I sort of I was watching it, and then I was like, oh, there's something I gotta do upstairs, and I went upstairs, did whatever I was doing, but I forgot that I had to go back down, which is, I feel like really guilty about it, obviously. But what was worse was that I went and took a nap, and nobody was home, and it was on the stove, and it was on, the fire was on, right? And yeah, my dad came home, and I guess he could smell the smoke, and all the herbs were burnt, but it didn't start a fire, thankfully. But he was just so mad. He's like, couldn't you smell that? And I was like,
No.
oh shit.
Isn't that wild? Isn't
Yeah.
that wild to you that you've lived with your dad probably for so long and he still doesn't remember?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, because it's invisible, like we said, right? And even very often, like even like today, or not today, but and these days, like he'll be cooking, and then he'll be talking about an ingredient. He'll be talking about an ingredient. He'll be like, "Yep, so this smells like that," and then he'll bring it up to my nose, and I'll be like, "Sorry, I can't. I'm sorry, like I can't help you there." Um,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, if my dad didn't come home early enough and close the stove early enough, that might have been, that might have, burnt. And that might
Mhm.
have even, I don't know if that would have started a fire or whatever else. And when you mentioned smoke earlier, yeah, like I think I read before that when you're in a house fire, oftentimes what can kill you first isn't the fire, but just inhaling that
Smoke.
much smoke. Yeah.
Mhm.
And if you can't smell that smoke, you're just breathing in normally, and that. So there's fire, there's smoke, um, and there's gas leak. I don't know. I recently posted a video of this gas explosion in one of the Anosmia Facebook groups. I don't know if you saw it, but I think it was just at a store. I can't remember. I don't know what country it was in, but it was just a store. People doing regular things, cashier. Somebody was buying something, and everybody just burst into flames just abruptly. And it was just, and it wasn't it's not like a fire where, oh, you see the fire and it's building up. It was just immediate. It was abrupt. Everything just burst into flames. And these were people that could probably smell. I mean, like they're just regular people, right? But for people like us, like it would be even more, like and as part of like, I made a couple of videos that were slightly political, and it has to do with this authoritarian regime that has sort of been known to find ways to sort of like get rid of people, whether it's whatever. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but then I've always thought that like if somebody wanted to like assassinate me, they could really just like bait me into coming into a room, and then it's already filled with gas, and then just like lighting a fire, and I'd be gone. So like,
Very specific to anosmics.
wait, sorry, say that again.
I said that would be a very specific way to go for anosmics.
Yeah, and they know now that I would be vulnerable to that. So
Right.
yeah, all right. Well, so last question, I guess. This is also a question that you ask your guests. What do you wish that people who can smell know more about our community? People who have smell disorders. I mean, we sort of talked about it, but I'll have.
Yeah, I think no, it's always a good question. I really like asking people this because I think that it's so important to take us seriously. Um, for whatever reason, maybe because it's invisible, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal. And so if I sit here and I say to my husband or my family or my friends, like, this is hard,
Yeah.
I am struggling. I really wish I could smell. I really wish I could perceive flavor in my foods. They can't really do very much about it to like fix it for me. But those who are like flippant, and not just family and friends, but just in general, like those who are flippant about the condition, it can be really painful. I think it's important to take people's pain seriously. And maybe that sounds dramatic, but it's not. Like, it's a condition that you live with, and on a day to day existence, you cope with it. My coping mechanisms, my resilience levels now are really high. It's been a decade. Like, I'm okay in general. But I've been on record on the podcast as saying like there are certain moments that are just still devastating to me. Like every once in a while, you'll get out a clean load of laundry, and I can remember just like breathing in the clothes, and it's warm, and like the smell of the dryer sheets and the laundry soap, and it is just like such an awesome smell.
Mm.
And so every once in a while, there'll be that moment where it's just so sad,
Yeah.
and it's like you can't deal with it. So I think just taking people's experiences and what they're telling you about it seriously is really important. Like, don't be flippant, don't downplay it. And that's in general. Like, that's just good practice for any kind of pain people are dealing with, not just specific to anosmia. But I think that's if people are telling you that it's hard for them, it's hard for them. And I think it is so important to try and remember. I know that it's invisible, but I think it's important as like a good friend or a good family member to really remember or try to make an effort to remember that we can't smell. So I know that like my mom in particular, I've said this before on an episode, I think she goes out of her way now when we're together. She still lives in Idaho, I'm in New Jersey, but whenever we're together, she will sometimes start describing something for me, the way that it smells, and I don't have to ask. And it's the most, like the kindest gesture
Yeah.
to do that for someone of like,
Mm.
oh, it smells like remember that laundry soap that we used to have when you were a little girl? Like that's what it
Mm.
smells like. And you're just like, oh, that's so
Yeah.
nice.
So
Just things like that. So just being really mindful of it and making a point to remember. I think that's really important.
yeah, it almost feels like you might have been, we might sort of be a community that's sort of left out because we don't have that smell. But once she sort of includes you in that, yeah, it's sort of she's including you in that experience, right? Reminding you.
Mhm.
That's really nice. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, one of the phrases that I've heard is, I don't sense that you're letting go of like a victim mentality. And I don't know, it's just like very often for people to, very easy for people to sort of just say that, right? Um, and going back to how like anosmia can tie to your mental health. Yeah, I just think that like people that can smell, like they're so lucky to be able to have that like every day, like whenever they eat, that they could just like experience that, like, and because
Mhm.
that first time that I smelled, it was, this might be a little like, it's not dramatic, it was almost like orgasmic. All right, like because it was
Right.
just so much more to it, and it's tied to, that thing that you have to do in order to live, which is breathe, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I completely agree that people should be a little more considerate. Well, thank you very much for joining me. I mean, I
You're
think
welcome.
that's a
Thank you for
really
having me.
fun and meaningful conversation.
I am serious. I'm looking forward to your taste testing video if you
Yeah,
decide that.
yeah. I mean, if I'll see if I can, get some things together. And
Another one you should consider is your Taiwanese chicken nuggets versus just like frozen chicken nuggets. I want to
oh,
know if you can differentiate them.
interesting.
You have someone who can help you with this?
Maybe, yeah. I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can do.
That would be a good one. So we talked about ice cream, we talked about yogurt,
Yeah.
we talked about, I don't remember what else it was, but that's because you talk about how much you love Taiwanese chicken nuggets. So I want to know
Yeah.
if you can tell the difference between your beloved chicken nuggets and like store-bought frozen ones.
Although the store-bought frozen ones, they're probably gonna come in those like flat-shaped ones, whereas
Okay.
yeah, might be a little
Well,
hard, but
whatever's similar. Maybe
yeah,
like McDonald's nuggets versus these ones. I don't know.
yeah. Well, I'll see what I can do. Yeah. How could people find you, your podcast, and your social media? Do you want to list that for
Yeah.
everybody?
So the Smell Podcast is at the Smell Podcast on all the things. There's like a Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter. And then for this shout out to the Smell and Taste Association of North America, you can find us at Stana.org, I think, on Twitter and Instagram, or you can visit the website. It's just the Stana.org and connect with us there.
All right. And your podcast is on, well, I use Spotify, but I'm sure they're on the other Apple
Yeah,
Podcasts and
podcast. I think it's on all the things.
all the
It's on
things. Oh,
all
great.
the platforms.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining me.
You're
Appreciate it.
welcome.
All right.
Yeah.